Welcome back to the Talent Talk Radio Show. In case you missed my first guest, don't worry. This show will be turned into a podcast. We throw it up on iTunes. You can listen on iHeartRadio or wherever you get your podcasts. And if you just can't figure that out, well, you can always go to talenttalkradio.com. We have all of our shows there, and you can subscribe to Podbean and get alerted anytime we upload a new show, which is generally about every week. So let's go ahead and bring in my next guest. He's live here in studio. We want to welcome Charlie Wilson, the Executive Director and CEO of the Southern California Water Coalition. And if you don't know what that is, I think we're going to find out in a minute. So don't forget to tweet your questions to @PeopleG2. Use that hashtag Talent Talk, or just follow along with our live tweeting and all the best little tidbits that we come up with today. My producer Mike will throw them up there. So Charlie, welcome to the show.
Great to be with you. Thanks, Chris.
Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself? What should we know about you? And then, of course, explain to us what is the Southern California Water Coalition.
Oh, so many things to say.
Right.
It's
only a 25-minute.
So 20-minute show. All right. Let me just get started now. I've been in and around public policy for going on 30 years. Found a mentor years ago that really turned me on to the issue of infrastructure. Mm-hmm. So I've had this sort of varied career with lots of unique opportunities to it, where I have worked in the state legislature. I've done communications for a state and United States senator. Got recruited into the electric utility business just in time to do deregulation.
Right.
We all know how that worked out so very well here in California.
Right.
And then from there, I kind of became really involved in things like infrastructure, and very passionate about infrastructure. In that I had these lessons taught to me that infrastructure really is the skeletal backbone on which our economy and our communities thrive. And it's just something that stuck with me. And so I've sort of developed this expertise in water and in energy, having served as an elected official. Done a variety of things, and when the opportunity presented itself to retire out of the Edison Company 3 years ago, I took over this nonprofit, Southern California Water Coalition, as their CEO and executive director, as an opportunity really to extend sort of my skill set, my passion, my leadership within the community, and to take that and bridge it into a wider regional and statewide public policy opportunity.
So the last few years with everything happening in our political environment, not to get into particular political finger pointing, but I've had friends and colleagues and people who I guess sort of take this approach that, there's nothing good about government, right? This is just sort of this general idea. Until suddenly something happens, like, I don't know, we're in a drought, right? And I think people then became very aware of these really old lessons that I remember learning when I went to the Hoover Dam about how water is partitioned off, and all of these sort of agreements and things, and certain water goes here and there. And of course, people did their best back then to come up with what they thought was the best possible way to do that, not realizing that our state would grow as big as it did, our agriculture as big as it did. I mean, it's so complex, right? And so infrastructure has the most incredible impact on our lives. When it's working well, we ignore it. We have no sense it's there and don't appreciate it. And then when it's not working, of course, we're upset.
That's exactly right. I don't want to think about it. And
right.
In fact, in particular in California, I mean, if you do, as you think about it, we've created the 5th largest economy in the world on the backs of people that came before us that created water systems, electric systems, gas, transportation. I mean, there is a
sewage. Don't forget about the biggest.
Well, you got to bring the good stuff in. You got to take the bad stuff out. And all through that period of time, we created this expectation that it would be abundant and near free.
Right.
So not only do I not know where it comes from, I don't understand the value proposition once it comes to my house or my business, but I also really don't want to think about it, as you say, until the light switch doesn't work or until it doesn't come out of the faucet. In fact, I did some public opinion polling of my own a couple of years ago as we were talking about some things up in the Bay Delta. And literally in Southern California, I can point to you and say, do you know where your water comes from? And they will point to the sink. And then when I ask them, do you know where the delta is? And they will say, well, yeah, that's my delta faucet.
Right.
And that's about the extent of which they really wanted to think about it until something happened. There was a crisis, and we went through 6 years of drought, the last drought, and I've been through a couple of them now in California. And that's what really kind of brings the opportunity into people's forefront, into their conscious thinking.
Right.
And so there's opportunity in that. Now we've been through a couple of years. We've had unprecedented rainfall and snow, this year being one of them. So the good news is it's top of mind. Bad news, it's top of mind. Good news, the state legislature's really talking about it now. Bad news? Yeah, the legislature's talking about it. And so the opportunity then is to be able to take a particular skill set, a particular coalition, a very broad-based coalition, and how do you then engage elected leaders, regulatory leaders, people that actually are decision makers, educate them? How do you educate them so they can make an informed choice?
Yeah, and I think that's one of the big struggles, and especially as big of a state as ours, as many people, as many representatives as we have, is not only having them help maybe solve a problem, but making sure they have all the information they need to make the right decision. That's often the biggest complaint about from constituents, is that they tried to help, but they ended up just making the problem worse because they didn't have all the information. So let's maybe talk a little bit deeper about the Water Coalition itself. I know you guys rely on volunteers to serve on its board as a task force, and you write white papers, and you do all sorts of things to sort of help the cause overall. But what do you do as the executive director to keep maybe people motivated as a volunteer? I mean, we are talking about talent here, so let's kind of redirect it in the sense of, you're focused on a common purpose. Do you have a really strong whip? I mean, what do you do here?
You actually begin with that common purpose. I mean, that's what the organization, it's 35 years old now. It came out of a political crisis back in the early 1980s. So there are people that were motivated within the Southern California region back. Some of those people, we stand on their shoulders as examples of great leadership. So there was a natural inclination to come and say, you know what, this can't happen again. We've got to do better. So this coalition was created back in the early 1980s. It has about 200 various members to it. In fact, it is the single broadest coalition around a single issue in the state that I'm aware of, and that's where it includes agricultural interests. Ag clearly cares about water.
Right.
No water, no food. Business, industry care about water. You need it for economic growth and stimulus. You need it for the environment. The unions, the labor movement, they care because of the jobs that are associated with it. Obviously, water agencies care. They're invested. Cities, counties, other public entities, and other nonprofits all have some commonality, and so they're motivated to say there ought to be a better way. And within that broad coalition, then, we can talk geographically from Kern County to the Mexican border and literally from the coast to the state line about what is unique about Southern California, and how does Southern California fit into the larger state whole, recognizing that over 50% of the state's population is south of Wilshire Boulevard. So in Southern California has the votes, has the people. That's where you have to have decisions. You have to have people educating and coming forward to Sacramento, not having Sacramento step down.
And maybe all the majority of it is down here, but the water's got to go through the top first, right? We're last on the train.
That's the dichotomy. The water's in the north, and the people are in the south. Up north, people see rivers and lakes, and they understand water. Here, because it's underground and it's in pipes, they don't get it. So the question then is, how do you take those motivated people, how do you then take more than half the state's population and then educate those elected leaders, those civic leaders, stakeholders, to make informed choice? That becomes the challenge. So that's part of then how we then engage. I don't try to boil the ocean. I can't go out and meet with all 25, 30 million people in Southern California. I got to be very targeted. So we have very talented people, all of whom come to the table, but all of whom have to be motivated in their own right as to why are they there, why do they care, and then what is it that they personally get out of it. They all want to do the right thing. So what is it then we can help them facilitate by doing the right thing?
So you said, this phrase a couple of times that, we can do better. And so maybe you could define what that means. Does that mean, are we looking for a great invention? Are we looking for a better way to take the salt water and turn it into regular water? Are we looking for a better way for all that water traveling north, not to so much for it to evaporate out? I mean, is it talking about water conservation, or is it like, yes to all of it, just a little bit of everything?
All the above. Right. There is no silver bullet. There is no way that I can say, if I just did that one thing, all my problems would go away.
Well, I heard if we didn't give water to the almond trees, then we would be fine, because they take
I love almonds. So, again, people eat, and that's part of the state's economy. So it is really, truly an all the above, and that's part of why a broad-based coalition, everybody has a place. So we can talk about, you can always conserve. More importantly, you can use it more efficiently. The fact that we bring water in Southern California from more than 200 to 400 miles away is something most people understand. I can use that more efficiently. There are other ways to get water here. You have to begin with bringing water from the north to the south. That is the base on which everything else takes place. Then beyond that, where does ocean desalination play? It does, but it doesn't solve everything. Stormwater capture and then recycling has a huge potential, particularly in places like Orange County, where they set the world standard for how you do recycling. All of those components have a measured approach and a reasonable solution based upon hydrology, based upon your local conditions. What works in coastal Orange County or Los Angeles does not work in the Mojave, does not work on the Colorado River. So you have to be able to take all of them to act independently, but still with a single purpose in mind, which is how do we solve the complex, interrelationship as opposed to just me. It's not a just me any more than I can say in business, if I solve my problem, then everything else is fine.
Right. And I imagine it's always going to be, no matter how good we might get at this issue, there's always going to be an issue that has to be talked about and solved. Because the moment you forget about it is the moment it starts to be, everything starts to crumble and become a problem again.
It is, and you sort of talked about it when you talked about the political environment that we're in. And the political environment is important, but I've noticed, when I started my career, it was back when Jerry Brown was just finishing governor the first time.
Right.
And he came back around. Never in my political career did I think I would actually be in alignment with, let alone working on projects with him and his administration. And yet that's where I found myself in the last 4 years. Now you have new administration putting a different message to it, but looking at the water issue in even a larger context of what does this mean in terms of climate change. Whether you believe it or not, what the result is, things are changing, and how do you meet that future need? Growing population, growing need for food, growing need for business and industry in a place where it's clearly changing because nothing remains static.
Right. And that it'll be fascinating. And maybe we may not be around the next time something major comes up or some major change. If global warming or that change continues to happen, and will people have to do something different? Will they all have to move to somewhere else? Will they it's really fascinating what might happen 100 years or 200 years from now or more. But
those are the things of science fiction. But I know that at present, there's some really good things that are on the table that we're working actively with this administration on. And how do you build a conveyance facility, an alternative, tunnels, if you will, around the Sacramento Bay Delta? Sacramento Bay Delta is collapsing environmentally in a number of different ways. It is going to fail. It is failing. How do you fix it? Well, you start with different types of projects, one of which being Water Fix, the California Water Fix, which we've been working on a couple of years. How do you take water around it, protects the fish, protects from seawater intrusion, protects from the earthquake? That makes sense. Well, a project like that's been in the works for some, 15 years. It would still take another 15 to 20 years to build if we started today. Then what do you do in the meantime? That's when you go to efficiency. That's when you go to alternative supplies. That's when you start doing other things that make sense for your local community.
Well, much like expanding the freeway, by the time they might finish that project, the demand may now have grown, and who knows where we'll be. But you have to at least be trying to keep up, I guess.
Right. But at the same time here, the last 20 years, we have doubled the population in Southern California, and we're using the same amount of water. We do a good job in Southern California about managing the resource, but we can do better. We can still do better, and that's part of the message that we utilize is we can do better, and it's not an if-or conversation, it's an and conversation.
Right. So let's talk about your organization specifically. I know a lot of organizations that are volunteer-based, I notice there's sort of one of two things happening. There's either an incredible succession plan, and they have a clear understanding that, hey, not all of us are going to be here forever, right? We want to keep this thing going, and who's going to be the next generation? Who's going to be the next people that are going to come in and help and keep this going? And then I have the other ones that are like, no, I'm not going to think about it, and, one day when that leader goes, so goes that group, right? So where do you guys fit on that, continuum there?
Well, I wish we were that smart to really plan that all out. I have to say, I was involved with the organization as a volunteer first. You stick around long enough, you end up as chairman of something,
Right,
and so I ended up as chair of the group for about 6 years. One of the things I learned in a 6-year tenure is, we really need a succession plan here because it can't rely upon any single volunteer or group of volunteers.
Yeah.
So we changed the business model. We fundamentally shifted the organization and how it operates. And then, quite frankly, we were really lucky. And then we found some highly qualified water professionals that had been in the business for 30, 40 years who volunteered their service to get us up and running in the new business model. We now have taken that, and we very deliberately have to go through every year. You've got to check it just like an individual company. Where's the next generation coming from? Who's likely to be available? What kind of talent do we need?
Right.
And frankly, the new chair is a lady who's just coming off a 2-year tenure as the chair of the State Water Association, trade association with all water agencies in California. The perfect individual from Southern California perspective then to be able to go out and to lead us as chair for the next couple of years. But then under her and working with her, who has particular talent, who has particular interest, how do we plug them in so that they make sense and it means something to them? Mm-hmm. And as they're motivated and they're getting something personally out of it, then their time with the organization grows and their commitment to the organization grows.
Is there sort of an overall goal or objective for you for the organization right now?
Water reliability for Southern California. It is that broad. That is our why.
Okay.
That is why we exist, is to provide an all-the-above approach for future generations to have a reliable water supply in Southern California. And where does that then play within the larger state context?
So let's say that with the average person, the average business, what should they be thinking about as it relates to the context of this conversation in water? Right now and maybe in the next couple of years?
The principles are really very much the same as they are in business. How do you motivate your employees? In this case, it's volunteers, because employees, as we now know in this economy, come and go on a whim. Mm-hmm. They're not tied womb to tomb like we used to see, back in the, generations of past. So how do you provide meaningful context for your members? How do you provide meaningful context and value for your volunteers? How do you give them challenges? How do you bring them along so that there is a trust-based relationship,
right,
that they're then willing to continue to serve and bring others to serve in future generations?
Yeah. And was any of that different, or did you feel it was a relatively smooth transition going from working from Southern California Edison, working for sort of a large organization with, I'm sure, lots of bureaucracy, to a volunteer organization, which is much more direct and nimble, right, with who you had involved with?
It may just be part of my personal passion, but throughout my career, even with Edison, there was an awful lot of becoming involved with local community-based organizations. It became sort of a running joke that often I would become involved in things and say, I'm going to volunteer for that group, and think, oh man, these people really need a shaking of the box, and they need to transform themselves. And so there were a lot of sort of redos. Mm-hmm. The electric utility business, big stable company, Edison, with the most radical change that they've had in their 120-year history over the last 10 years. And frankly, I see the same thing coming in water. How we do water is going to fundamentally shift. That's the challenge for me. That's what gets me up in the morning. Mm-hmm. That's why I go to work. That's why I do what I do. And now, how do I bring that passion? How do I bring that understanding to others so that they too see the importance of what water is to the overall community we live in?
Is there something from a leadership perspective that maybe it seems like you have a very sound foundation in what you believe and kind of where you're going and the vision that you're trying to communicate to everyone else? Is there something, did it just culminate in your brain, or do you feel like you had a particular mentor or learned something along the way that kind of clicked and that's what set you on your path?
It's a combination of a couple of things. One, you learn from your mistakes. And boy, I have made many of them.
Yeah.
So those things are embedded. I've also been truly fortunate to have some really great mentors, whether I was as a kid through athletics and coaching, mm-hmm. up through my professional experience. I have just been very fortunate and have a handful of people that I love and trust and who have imparted upon me their wisdom. And I'm just getting to that place in my life where I get a chance to do that for others.
Yeah, and I think that's so important that we have those opportunities to learn from our mistakes. We have those leaders, we have those mentors. But the other thing I find that people that are very successful, they're also continually learning, right? They want to know what's the newest thing, maybe newest idea. Not that you always have to be doing something new all the time, but at least be thinking about challenging your perspective, challenging where you might be headed, and deciding if you're on the right path or you need to make a tweak somewhere, right, to be better.
That's right.
Is there a book that you're reading right now, or maybe one that you typically suggest people check out?
There's a couple that I do. I just finished reading Elastic Thinking.
Okay.
Leonard Menlo. It was recommended to me. I had not thought about it. He's a physicist by trade. He's done books with Hawking and Deepak Chopra, of all things. So this guy, he's a physicist putting mathematics. I am not a math guy. I was promised that, in fact, there would be no math in public policy. But it gave me a different perspective, and it was paradigm shifts and how do people change? How do people, it's a corny phrase of get outside the box.
Right.
What's the mental process to actually go beyond where you're limited today and think in a way that will bring something new to the table? Those kinds of readings, I crave that sort of stuff. I will read pretty much anything that somebody recommends.
Well, and the fact that you've read it and you're promising us it won't be too much math. Anyone who's afraid of math can certainly take it. I read a book a few years back, like How Never to Be Wrong or something like that, and it was from a famous mathematician, and he said, I promise it won't be any math. 3 chapters in, I'm having like flashbacks to calculus. I'm like sweating in the car as I'm listening to him go through this equation to explain how most of the book wasn't math, but there was a few moments of just deep, like messing up with your brain kind of stuff.
And that's where his book with Deepak Chopra, they kind of like go back and forth between the spiritual and the provable mathematical, physical world. It's interesting stimulation mentally, but I take and I kind of triangulate that with a very deep sort of passion within a religious spirituality. I pull that from some of the top thinkers in the world of leadership, and I have a passion and went back and did master's work in leadership. What is the next generation look like? How do people emerge as leaders? And it's not about your authority. It's not about the position that you have. It's about a servant-based leadership. Everybody has an ability to lead within their own right and their own sphere of influence. How do you get people to harness that and then contribute that to the community that we live in? That's really very cool for me.
And a lot of that is what we started to talk about was being connected to purpose. If they're involved with your organization and they have a sense of exactly what they're trying to do or what your organization is trying to do, and if they're there as a volunteer, they must be on board.
Well, and I'm finding millennials these days, they're not so much into things like political parties and institutions because there's this stigma against a lot of those, but they'll volunteer. They'll find something that's meaningful to them, and they'll give their time, their talent, and their treasure to help their community get better.
So speaking of that, how can people get a hold of you or find out more about the Southern California Water Coalition? Maybe they want to volunteer, be involved. What's the best way for them to find out more?
SoCalWater.org, SoCalWater.org. In fact, if you missed that, it's SoCalWater.org.
That's an excellent 3+ there. Very well done. But Charlie, thanks so much for being on the show today and coming into the studio. I really enjoyed learning more about what you're doing and learning more about you.
A great pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for listening to today's show. Hopefully you've gained something you can use in your own career in a positive way. Next week, I'll be joined by Dov Barron, a consultant for Fortune 500 companies, and Milton Green, the HR director for Charter Communications. Until then, do what you love and show the world how talented you can be today.
You've been listening to Talent Talk Radio, brought to you by People G2.